Celeste Moreau tiptoed down the busy corridors of Oakhaven Academy, her scuffed Mary Janes tapping softly on the aged tile floors. At 15, she was barely 4'11" and fragile as spun glass, her hand-me-down uniform swallowing her petite frame. Deep shadows rimmed her eyes from the late-night hours she spent sewing intricate doll clothes for online clients to help her widowed grandmother afford groceries. Her chestnut hair was usually pulled back in a braid, and she kept her gaze lowered to evade the curious looks and hushed judgments that trailed her everywhere she went. The other students at Oakhaven Academy hailed from wealthy families, flaunting jewelry that cost more than Celeste's grandmother earned in a month. Their designer purses, latest tablets, and easy chatter about summer cruises on the ocean served as constant reminders that she was an outsider in their world. She was the charity student, the scholarship recipient who'd arrived from the impoverished part of the city when her old school suffered water damage. Celeste hugged her threadbare book bag closer as she made her way toward her cubby, trying to become invisible among the groups of giggling girls. Inside her coat pocket, 3 crinkled $5 bills represented her entire supply budget for the week. Funds her grandmother had saved by foregoing necessary medication and mending old clothes. She'd mastered the art of making those $15 last, purchasing only the most basic materials from the craft store and using them sparingly. Well, well, what have we here? The voice made Celeste shiver with apprehension. Brittany Sterling emerged from behind a row of lockers, like a lioness cornering its prey. At 16, Brittany was everything Celeste was not. Tall, athletic, and blessed with the kind of effortless charisma that came from never having to fret about expenses. Her father owned 2 jewelry shops in town, and Brittany never let anyone overlook it. Brand-name clothes, the newest iWatch, and a sparkling convertible in the student parking area announced her rank to anyone who cared to observe. Behind Brittany stood her loyal followers, Tiffany Chen, built like a volleyball player with hands the size of oven mitts, and Ashley Davis, smaller but bitter, with cold eyes that seemed to revel in other people's suffering. They called themselves the Supreme Divas, though Celeste privately regarded them as hyenas circling wounded creatures. Walking to class, scholarship case, Brittany's voice carried that condescending tone that made Celeste's stomach tighten with anxiety. Hope you remembered to bring your craft supply fee today. The Brittany Sterling Donation Fund is always accepting offerings. Celeste tried to walk around them, but Tiffany moved to block her path. The corridor suddenly felt smaller, the walls closing in from all sides as other students rushed past, their eyes carefully averted. Everyone at Oakhaven Academy knew the unspoken rule: you didn't cross Brittany Sterling unless you wanted to become her next victim. "I don't have much money," Celeste said quietly, which was essentially true. The $15 in her pocket was already earmarked for supplies, and surrendering it would mean going without essential tools until the next month. Brittany's laugh was high-pitched and mirthless. "Everyone has money, scholarship case. It's just a question of priorities. Now I'm going to ask you nicely one more time." She held out her hand, palm up, her diamond bracelet catching the fluorescent lights. "Contribution to the fund. $15 should suffice." Celeste felt her face flush with shame and anger, but she kept her voice level. "I need that money for supplies." "Supplies?" Ashley giggled. "What are you going to buy with $15? A spool of thread and a glue stick? Come on, girl, loosen up a little. Donate to a worthy cause." "The worthy cause being Brittany's weekend shopping spree," Tiffany added, cracking her knuckles meaningfully. Celeste could feel dozens of eyes on her now, students pretending to arrange their lockers while actually watching the spectacle unfold. Phones were already being pulled out, ready to film whatever transpired next. At Oakhaven Academy, humiliation was currency, and Brittany was about to make a substantial withdrawal from Celeste's dignity. "Please," Celeste said, hating how desperate she sounded. "I'll pay you back next week. I just need—" "You'll pay me back?" Brittany's voice rose with mock disbelief. You'll pay me back with what? Your grandma's pension money from cleaning rich people's houses? The reference stung like a slap. Celeste's grandmother did indeed work as a cleaner for several affluent families in town, scrubbing their floors and dusting their furniture for barely above minimum wage. It was honest work, respectable work, but Brittany made it sound degrading and shameful. "Don't talk about my grandmother," Celeste said softly, her hands clenching into fists at her sides. Brittany leaned in closer, close enough that Celeste could smell her expensive perfume and see the cruel amusement in her eyes. "Oh, did I strike a nerve? What's she going to do? Come here and scrub the floors in my defense?" Something snapped inside Celeste's chest, a carefully maintained boundary that had been holding back years of training and instinct. For just a moment, her body shifted automatically into a defensive stance, weight balanced, hands slightly raised, eyes focused. It was muscle memory from countless hours in the dojo, from a life that felt like a fading dream. But then reality crashed back in. This wasn't the karate studio at Black Lotus Academy where her mother had trained her since she was 7 years old. This wasn't the place where Anya Moreau, former state champion, had taught her daughter every technique, every form, every hard-earned lesson about self-discipline and respect. That world had vanished 5 years ago in a boating accident, along with her mother and their comfortable suburban life. After the memorial, everything had unraveled. The dojo closed when they couldn't afford the rent. Her grandmother took whatever cleaning job she could find. And Celeste made a promise to herself and to her mother's memory. She would never use her martial arts skills outside the dojo. Violence had taken her mother away from her in that accident, and she wouldn't let it consume her too. Celeste forced herself to relax, to step back down from the edge of violence. "Just leave me alone," she murmured, reaching into her coat pocket for the crinkled bills. "That's more like it," Brittany said with satisfaction, watching as Celeste's fingers closed around the money. "See how simple that was. Why do we have to go through this song and dance every time?" Every time. That was the crux of the matter. This wasn't the first time Brittany had demanded her supply money, and it wouldn't be the last. It had started small, $1 here, 50 cents there, always with the pretense that it was some kind of joke or harmless tradition. But as Celeste's passive resistance made it clear she wouldn't retaliate, the demands had escalated. "I don't have $15, Celeste said, pulling out 2 wrinkled 5s and 3 singles. "This is all I have." Brittany's expression darkened. "That's not going to cut it, scholarship case. $15 was the price. If you can't afford the full amount, maybe we need to discuss alternative payment arrangements." Celeste looked at the $13 in her hand, knowing it represented less than half her supply budget for the week. Surrendering it meant going without essential tools, but refusing might mean something much worse. $15, Brittany repeated, her voice taking on an edge that made nearby students step further away. "Or maybe we need to have a more serious discussion about your place in this academy." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Celeste could feel the weight of every stare, every phone camera pointed in her direction, every whispered comment that would follow her through the halls for weeks to come. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory. "In the dojo, you fight with honor. Outside the dojo, you walk away with dignity." But where was the dignity in this? Where was the honor in being systematically humiliated while everyone watched and did nothing? Celeste handed over the $13, her face burning with shame. "That's all I have," she repeated. Brittany pocketed the money with theatrical satisfaction. "Well then, I guess we'll have to call this a partial payment. You can bring me the other $2 tomorrow, plus interest. Let's say $4 total for the inconvenience." "That's not fair," Celeste said quietly. "Fair?" Brittany's laugh was sharp and cruel. "You want to talk about fair? Is it fair that you get to attend this academy on scholarship while students who actually belong here have to compete for spots? Is it fair that you take up space that could go to someone whose family actually contributes to this community?" Tiffany and Ashley nodded along like faithful disciples, though Celeste suspected they were just as uncomfortable with Brittany's cruelty as everyone else. They'd learned, like most people, that it was easier to go along with Brittany sterling than to stand up to her. "I earned my place here," Celeste said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Earned it?" Brittany's voice dripped with mock surprise. "With what? Your sob story about your dead mom and your cleaning lady grandma? Please, you're here because some bleeding heart headmaster decided this academy needed more diversity, and you were the best charity case they could find." The words hit like physical blows, each one carefully chosen to inflict maximum damage. Celeste felt tears threatening behind her eyes, but she refused to give Brittany the satisfaction of seeing her cry. Instead, she turned and started walking away, leaving behind the laughter and whispers that followed her like a poisonous cloud. She made it to the art room before the emotions overwhelmed her. Locking herself in a supply closet, Celeste let the frustration and humiliation wash over her. In her mind, she could see her mother's face, could hear Anya Moreau's voice explaining the intricate forms of karate. "Every martial artist has a choice," her mother had said during one of their last training sessions. "You can fight with anger, or you can fight with purpose. Anger makes you clumsy, makes you vulnerable. Purpose makes you precise, makes you strong." But what was the purpose in this situation? What was the point of having skills if you couldn't use them when you needed them most? Celeste knew she could disarm Brittany Sterling with a single swift move. Years of training had given her speed and technique that would astonish anyone who judged her by her size. She'd sparred with adult instructors, competed in regional tournaments, held her own against opponents who outweighed her by 50 pounds. But none of that mattered outside the dojo. Outside the dojo, violence only led to more violence, and Celeste couldn't afford to get suspended or expelled. Her scholarship depended on maintaining good grades and staying out of trouble. One fight, one moment of lost control, and she'd lose everything her family had sacrificed for. The harassment continued to escalate over the following weeks. Brittany seemed to take Celeste's passivity as permission to push harder, to demand more, to inflict greater humiliations. The daily supply money extortion became just one part of a systematic campaign of cruelty designed to break Celeste's spirit. Accidental bumps in the hallway became regular occurrences, always timed when teachers weren't looking. Celeste's cubby was defaced with marker words like freeloader and welfare, the cleaning staff scrubbing it off, but never fast enough to prevent dozens of students from seeing it. Her book bag was accidentally knocked from her hands, spilling her art supplies across the floor, while Brittany and her friends watched with amusement. But it was the psychological warfare that hurt the most. Brittany had a knack for finding Celeste's most vulnerable spots and pressing on them with surgical precision. Comments about her mother's death, her grandmother's job, her hand-me-down clothes, and her scholarship status became a daily soundtrack of humiliation. "Hey, scholarship case," Brittany would call out in the cafeteria, loud enough for half the school to hear. "How's your grandma enjoying her new job? I heard the Smiths fired her for breaking their vase. Is that where you get your supply money now?" The lies were almost worse than the truth. Celeste's grandmother had never been fired, had never broken anything, but the rumors spread through the school like wildfire. Students who had previously ignored her now looked at her with suspicion or pity. Teachers who had seemed supportive became more distant, as if they were questioning whether she really belonged at Oakhaven Academy. 4 weeks into the school year, Celeste had lost 8 pounds from skipping meals to pay Brittany's daily tax. Her grades were starting to slip as she spent more time working extra hours on doll clothes to make up for the lost money. Dark circles under her eyes had deepened, and her clothes hung even more loosely on her shrinking frame. Her grandmother noticed, of course. Sophia Moreau wasn't the kind of woman who missed details, especially when it came to her only granddaughter. "Mija," "You're not eating enough," she said one evening as they sat at their small kitchen table, sharing a dinner of soup and bread that she'd stretched to last 2 meals. "Are you having difficulties at school?" Celeste looked at her grandmother's worried face, seeing the exhaustion lines that came from working 14-hour days to keep them afloat. She was already carrying so much weight, so much responsibility. How could she add her problems to her burden? "I'm fine, Abuela," she lied. "Just busy with schoolwork." Sophia studied her face with the intensity of someone who'd learned to read people's true intentions through years of cleaning their most private spaces. "Celeste, you know you can tell me anything, right? If someone is giving you trouble." "I said I'm fine," Celeste repeated, her voice sharper than she'd intended. The hurt that flashed across her grandmother's face made her immediately regret her tone, but the damage was done. That night, lying in bed and listening to her grandmother's exhausted breathing through the thin walls of their apartment, Celeste stared at the framed photo on her nightstand. It showed her and her mother at the dojo, both of them grinning and holding up trophies after Celeste had won her first regional tournament. She'd been 12 then, already showing real potential in the martial arts. "You've got natural talent, mija," her mother had said that day. "But talent without discipline is just wasted potential. The dojo will teach you about yourself, about what you're made of when everything else is stripped away." Celeste knew what she was made of. She'd proven it dozens of times in sanctioned matches, against opponents who came at her with everything they had. But those fights had rules, referees, safety equipment. They had honor and respect, even in defeat. What Brittany was doing wasn't fighting. It was systematic cruelty, designed to break her down piece by piece, until there was nothing left but compliance and fear. And the worst part was that Celeste's refusal to defend herself was only making it worse. The breaking point came on a Wednesday morning in November. Celeste arrived at school to find her cubby defaced again, but this time the damage was worse. Someone had jammed the lock and dumped the contents all over the hallway floor. Her textbooks were scattered and torn, her sketchbook soaked with what smelled like nail polish remover, and her only photo of her mother, the one she kept taped inside her cubby door, was crumpled and ripped. Students walked past the mess, some laughing, others looking uncomfortable but unwilling to help. Celeste knelt in the hallway, trying to salvage what she could, her hands shaking as she carefully smoothed out the damaged photograph. "Oops," came Brittany's voice from behind her. "Looks like someone had an accident with their cubby. That's too bad." Celeste didn't turn around. She couldn't trust herself to look at Brittany's smirking face without doing something she'd regret. Instead, she continued gathering her ruined belongings, her jaw clenched so tight it ached. "You know," Brittany continued, her voice taking on that familiar condescending tone, "maybe this wouldn't happen if you paid your fees on time. The donation fund exists for a reason. Leave her alone." The voice came from somewhere behind Brittany, soft but clear. Celeste looked up to see Samuel Olsen standing near his cubby with a stack of books in his arms. He was one of the quiet boys too, but unlike Celeste, he seemed to blend into the background by choice rather than circumstance. He was kind in an unassuming way, with dark hair and thoughtful eyes that usually stayed focused on his studies. Brittany's attention shifted to him like a viper sensing new prey. "Well, well, looks like scholarship case has a boyfriend. How touching." Samuel's cheeks flushed, but he didn't back down. "I said leave her alone. She hasn't done anything to you." "Hasn't done anything?" Brittany's voice rose with theatrical indignation. "She's taking up space that belongs to real students. She's here on charity, stealing opportunities from girls who actually deserve them." Tiffany and Ashley had moved to flank Samuel now, forming their usual triangle of intimidation. Celeste felt her chest tighten with a familiar rage, the same feeling she'd gotten in the dojo when an opponent threw a cheap shot or fought dirty. "Just ignore them," Samuel whispered to Celeste. "They're not worth it." But they were worth it. Not because of what they were doing to her, Celeste had learned to endure that kind of treatment. They were worth it because now they were threatening Samuel, someone whose only crime was showing her a moment of basic human decency. "You know what I think?" Brittany said, her voice carrying that edge that meant real trouble was coming. "I think our little charity case here has been holding out on us. I think she's got more money than she lets on." She gestured to Tiffany, who grabbed Celeste's book bag and dumped its contents across the floor. Celeste's art supplies tumbled out, along with her worn textbooks, a half-eaten energy bar she'd been saving for lunch, and her wallet. Brittany snatched up the wallet and opened it, finding the $15 bill Celeste had been saving for her grandmother's medication next month. "Well, well," Brittany said with mock surprise. "What do we have here? Looks like scholarship case has been lying to us." "That's not mine to give," Celeste said quietly, her voice steady despite the rage building in her chest. "It's for my grandmother's medication." Brittany held the 15 up to the light, as if checking for counterfeits. "Your grandmother's medication? How sweet. But see, you owe me quite a bit of back payments plus interest. I think this just about covers it." "Give it back," Celeste said, standing slowly. Something in her voice made Brittany pause. For just a moment, uncertainty flickered across the bully's face. Celeste was standing differently now, her weight balanced, her hands slightly raised. Everything about her posture signaled danger to anyone who knew how to read the signs. But Brittany Sterling wasn't one of those people. "Or what?" she said, pocketing the 15. "You gonna do something about it, scholarship case? You gonna finally grow a backbone?" Celeste looked at her for a long moment, seeing not just Brittany, but every bully who'd ever used their size or status to hurt someone weaker. She thought about her mother, about the promise she'd made, about the violence that had torn her family apart in that boating accident 5 years ago. Then she thought about Samuel, about his courage in speaking up when no one else would. She thought about her grandmother, working 14-hour days and still finding ways to smile. She thought about that $15 bill, earned through hours of scrubbing floors and dusting furniture, meant to buy the medication her grandmother desperately needed. Sometimes, Celeste realized, keeping one promise meant breaking another. "Yeah," she said quietly, her voice carrying a new edge that made several nearby students stop and stare. "I think I am." Brittany threw the first punch, a wild right hook that telegraphed itself from 3 feet away. In the old days, before the promise, before the guilt, Celeste would have slipped it easily and countered with devastating precision. This time was no different. Celeste moved like water, slipping Brittany's punch by inches and coming back with a textbook-perfect palm strike that caught the bigger girl right on the nose. Brittany's eyes watered and she stumbled backward, her expensive heels slipping on the polished floor. The hallway erupted in shocked silence. Tiffany rushed forward, her imposing frame moving with surprising speed, but Celeste was already in motion. 5 years of dojo dust fell away like an old coat as muscle memory took over. She ducked under Tiffany's clumsy grab and delivered a precise knee strike to the bigger girl's stomach, doubling her over. Ashley tried to grab Celeste from behind, but Celeste had sensed her movement. A martial artist learns to use all her senses. She spun, breaking Ashley's grip with a technique her mother had drilled into her thousands of times, and followed up with a clean back kick that sent Ashley sprawling backward into a row of lockers. The entire confrontation had lasted less than 20 seconds. 3 bigger, stronger opponents lay on the ground, groaning and struggling to catch their breath, while Celeste stood over them barely winded. The crowd of students that had gathered was silent, their phones out and recording, trying to process what they'd just witnessed. "Here's how this works," Celeste said, her voice calm despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. She looked down at Brittany, who was struggling to sit up with blood trickling from her nose. "You're going to give me back my money, all of it, every dollar you've taken from me over the past month." Brittany wiped blood from her nose with a shaking hand. This isn't over. Celeste crouched down so she was eye level with the fallen bully. Yes, it is, because if you ever touch me again, if you ever demand money from anyone else, if you ever make someone feel small just because you can, I'll be there, and next time, I won't hold back. She stood and offered her hand to Samuel, helping him gather his scattered books while ignoring the phones that were still recording and the growing crowd of students who couldn't believe what they'd just witnessed. The quiet scholarship case, the easy target, the charity student had just dismantled 3 bigger opponents with surgical precision. Brittany struggled to her feet, her designer clothes wrinkled and her ego bruised worse than her face. You think this makes you tough? You think this changes anything? Celeste turned back to face her, and for the first time in months, her voice carried real authority. I think it changes everything. The question is whether you're smart enough to figure that out. Headmaster Evans arrived within minutes, summoned by the commotion and the flood of social media posts that were already spreading through the school. Celeste expected suspension, expulsion, maybe even legal consequences. Instead, she found herself sitting in the headmaster's office, listening to a parade of student testimonies about Brittany's systematic bullying campaign. It seems, Headmaster Evans said carefully, studying the statements piled on his desk, that this incident was the result of ongoing harassment that our staff failed to address properly. He looked at Celeste with something that might have been respect. While I cannot officially condone fighting, I understand that sometimes people are pushed beyond reasonable limits. Brittany, sporting a bandaged nose and a severely bruised ego, sat in the corner with her parents. Her father, a prominent jeweler who donated generously to the school's scholarship fund, was red-faced with embarrassment. Her mother kept shooting worried glances at Celeste, as if she couldn't quite believe her daughter had been defeated by someone half her size. There will be consequences for everyone involved, the headmaster continued. But given the circumstances and the testimonies we've received, I think in-school suspension would be appropriate rather than expulsion. Celeste nodded, accepting the punishment. It was fair, even lenient, considering what could have happened. But more importantly, it sent a message to every other bully in the school. Actions have consequences, and sometimes the quiet students aren't as helpless as they seem. The video of the fight went viral within hours, spreading far beyond the walls of Oakhaven Academy. Students who had never spoken to Celeste before approached her in the halls, some to congratulate her, others to share their own stories of being bullied. Teachers who had previously overlooked her began including her in class discussions, treating her with newfound respect. But the biggest change was in Celeste herself. She walked taller now, spoke with more confidence, and no longer felt the need to make herself invisible. She wasn't looking for fights, but she wasn't running from confrontation either. Word had spread about her martial arts background, and suddenly everyone wanted to know her story. Samuel, who had found his own courage in Celeste's example, became her closest friend at school. He told her later that watching her stand up to Brittany had inspired him to speak up in class, to join the debate team, to stop hiding his intelligence behind a mask of indifference. "You showed me that being different isn't something to be ashamed of," he said one day as they sat together at lunch, at a table that was no longer empty. "It's something to be proud of." Brittany, meanwhile, had become a cautionary tale. The video of her defeat had humiliated her in front of the entire school, and her reputation as an unstoppable force had been shattered in less than 20 seconds. Her core group of friends remained loyal, but the fear and automatic respect she'd commanded were gone forever. Celeste saw her sometimes in the halls, walking with her head down, probably feeling some small fraction of the humiliation she'd inflicted on others. Part of Celeste felt sorry for her, understanding now that bullies were often victims themselves, acting out their own pain and insecurity on easier targets. But mostly, Celeste felt satisfied that justice had been served. She'd kept her promise to her mother in spirit, if not in letter. using violence only as a last resort and only to protect herself and someone who couldn't protect themselves. And she'd used it with restraint and precision, never crossing the line from self-defense to aggression. The incident had changed more than just the dynamics between Celeste and Brittany. It had sent ripples throughout the entire school, empowering other victims to speak up and making potential bullies think twice before targeting someone who seemed vulnerable. Teachers paid closer attention to social dynamics in their classrooms. Students were more likely to intervene when they saw harassment happening. Most importantly, Celeste had learned that strength wasn't just about the ability to throw a punch or take one. Real strength was about standing up for what was right, even when it was scary. It was about protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. It was about refusing to let fear dictate your actions or define your character. As Celeste walked through the halls of Oakhaven Academy now, she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly who she was and what she was capable of. She wore her hand-me-down clothes with pride, ate her simple lunches without shame, and faced each day knowing that she belonged there just as much as anyone else. The scholarship case, who had once been seen as an easy target, had become something much more valuable. A reminder that strength comes in many forms, and sometimes the quietest voices make the loudest statements when they finally decide to speak.